welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we have the French election results. Hackers demonstrating a critical infrastructure hack at a conference in Miami. And in sports, despite beating the world number one, Russia's Andrei Rublev will not play Wimbledon. Far-right Marine Le Pen has lost and Emmanuel Macron has won the French presidential election on Sunday. In the first round of this election, the left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon came third, but put up a very strong fight. The difference between Mélenchon and Le Pen in the first round was only 1.2% of the votes. The six left candidates got just about 10% of the votes in the first round, excluding Mélenchon's La France Soumise, which got almost 22% of the votes. The first round did not throw up a clear winner, so there was a runoff which happened on Sunday. We go to Prabir for more on the developments. Prabir, a sigh of relief among many countries over the result, but is it really as good as it seems?
Well, let's put it this way. Every time that we had the runoff between the center-right and the far-right, the center-right comes home because all the others, those who are center, to the left of center, and even more to the left, do not have an option in that case. And in France, what we have been seeing is that this option of the left being sort of going out of the elections and it becoming one between center-right and the right is becoming essentially the election that we then observe. Of course, this is exactly what has happened earlier as well, and then all voters should then keep out the far right is the call that is given. In France, it makes sense because, after all, Le Pen does represent a kind of white French supremacist understanding of politics, and whatever or however much she has tried to change her colors, that's what she really is and what she represents. And there is really very little to doubt on that score. The question, of course, is what happens inside France is not exactly what is important outside France. If we look at the world today, then for us at the moment, what's happening in Europe is very important. And the fact that Europe or the European Union is virtually succumbing to the United States, becoming its outpost, so to say, in Europe, the war in Ukraine, which is NATO's expansion and attempt to subjugate Russia, if you will, break Russia through sanctions. All of this, in this, a joker in the pack would be actually also right government, which, for instance, Le Pen has said that she doesn't think that France should be in the European Union or even possibly in the NATO. So all of this is where we also saw the problem, for instance, when Trump and Hillary Clinton are facing off. That, of course, the United States internally will be much worse if Trump comes to power. But externally, an isolationist Trump, which is what most people thought he would be better than Hillary Clinton, who had already gone to war in Libya, as well as supported all the wars that the United States has launched in post, shall we say, 2000. So all the wars that you can talk about, whether it's Iraq, whether it is Afghanistan or Libya, Hillary has been in the forefront of that. So this is the kind of questions that we get when you look at elections, that what is good internally for the country, what the progressives inside the country want, and what the external world wants may not be identical, because the choices for France and the choices for the world could be different in this context. But the question is, as you point out, if the left had actually come together, and it was a very small percentage of votes which separated Mélenchon and Le Pen, in which case there could have been a very different configuration of votes. And the alternative then between the center-right and the left would have been much sharper. Would it have made a difference to France? Yes, because both withdrawing from NATO and also changing internal politics of France was what Mélenchon was talking about. So the combination of these two would have been, both for France and for most of us elsewhere, would have been there for a more positive element. So I think this is again another opportunity lost for the left to understand that pushing Mélenchon's candidacy to number 2 was the election this time, not the first round was not about what is their strength in the elections. And it's interesting that the French Communist Party, which had supported Mélenchon twice, this time did not.
Why did this happen?
Well, that's a question we have to ask them. We can't ask. I really would have no answer. But the point is the 2% may not have appeared to be a significant element before the elections. But if that 2% had gone to Mélenchon, as it did in the earlier times, then probably he would have gone over the top. And then he would have been number 2 and not Le Pen. And I think that's a huge blow for the left in France.
All right, Prabir, thank you very much for that update. Recent reports say 2 Dutch self-described ethical hackers broke into the security systems of industrial control systems that run critical infrastructure across the world. This includes power plants, refineries, and even power grids. Kaspersky, the well-known Russian security company, had also raised concerns over security risks in the same software and standards. These standards underlie communications between different parts of critical infrastructure. The United States has also recently flagged that its critical infrastructure could get targeted by Russian hackers. For most of us, this is all gobbledygook, not for Prabir Purkayastha, who is here to tell us more. So Prabir, what does it mean, industrial control systems, and why is this recent hacking effort so significant?
Well, you're right that this is something that I should be able to speak, hopefully not in gobbledygook, but in understandable English. I was for a very long time a part of working on such control systems. So I'm not speaking here in my news click capacity, which is what I generally do, but also wearing my technical hat. Industrial control systems are basically systems that run what you would call as factories, what you call process plants, the refineries being one of them, which are continuous running plants that, for instance, the power plants, all of these are called basically process plants where certain processes happen which take in a set of inputs and produce outputs. Unlike discrete processes like, for instance, cutting cloth and making clothes. Those are discrete processes. These are continuous processes. What are continuous processes? Producing electricity, because you want it continuously. Producing water, processing sewage, refineries. You want oil 24 hours a day to be refined. You don't stop these plants. If you do, then starting up again is also a problem. It takes time, it takes a huge amount of effort to start and stop such plants. You do it for certain maintenance purposes, not otherwise. And of course, of say steel plants where you produce steel. So these are all the plants which are your part of your critical infrastructure, because after all, if this fails, any of these fails, then that plant is affected. If the plant is affected, they could take out a huge amount of your production capacity. Taking out a refinery, huge issue. Taking out a steel plant, a huge issue. In this particular case, there is an additional risk because these also go into controlling the grid. And when you control the electrical grid, if that fails, then the country's power system goes down. If you fail the European grid goes down, number of countries. So these are the critical infrastructure that we are talking about. And what does a process control do? Well, it controls the plant. Like your brain controls your body. These essentially control the plant, coordinate the various activities that take place in the plant. And this means that different kind of systems have to talk to each other. If you want to run a plant, human beings have to talk. Similarly, different parts of the machine which are being controlled by different kind of what would be called controllers have to talk to each other. And what has been hacked is essentially the communication part of these controls. That means when you communicate to the human operator, when you communicate to each of the control system elements, this is done under what is open process control open process control software, which is what is called UA. So the whole thing is called UA OPC protocol.
Right.
Now it's a set of softwares. That's the simplest way to explain it. Now, this being hacked, and it took apparently 2 days for the
That's right.
Dutch duo Cowper and Alcibiades to hack it. This would indicate that there is huge holes in the security of this software. This is something that we have known, that we have tried to keep it a secret among ourselves, not letting other people know how badly the security is there on the systems. But now, as you said, repeated flags have been raised, and repeated flags have been raised now indicating clearly that we have a huge security issue with respect to this control systems. Why is it so? The main reason for this is earlier these systems were believed to be isolated and therefore not that easily accessible to hacking. What has happened now is that as enterprise-wide software is basically deployed, management wants to know what's happening to the plant, what's happening to inventory, what's happening to production, where is the problem, and there is a necessity for giving information from the process controls to other parts of the enterprise. And if you do look at what used to be called the air-gapped system, these air gaps don't exist anymore. Air gaps means this process control system wouldn't touch the general IT systems, which would be processing data. Now they do touch. How many times do they touch? According to a review done by the Homeland Security in the United States, the average is 11 places, but in some of them can go up even more. So what it means is air gaps don't exist, and if they don't exist, that means for hackers, it's possible to get into the control systems. And if that happens, of course, you know what happens. We had the Stuxnet, which took down the Iranian centrifuges deployed by, again, it seems United States and Israel. It's pretty much open at the moment. I don't think there's any doubt about it. How did they cross the air gap? That we still don't know. But the air gap was crossed because otherwise these systems are supposed to be isolated. The other parts of it is Venezuelan grid. The Venezuelan government said when Maduro's government was being attacked in different ways by the United States, that had been hacked by the US. Experts have said, yes, that is possible. Whether it happened or not, that of course only US can say. But this is possible. The Ukrainians have claimed, the Russians have taken down parts of their grid earlier. Yes, all these are possible. And recently, the US has again said there is a threat perception of a quasi-government, according to them, government entity, which could be targeting industrial control systems. So industrial control systems and its hacking now sit to be at the center of this software threat, the software security threat that the world is foreseeing.
Is this because they can't afford to upgrade the software that they're using, the systems that they're using, that we see these attacks?
You see, the upgrading of the software is going to be very, very difficult. The systems are supposed to have a lifetime of 10 to 15 years, and the upgrading, unlike what happens in your machine, where you can upgrade very easily, upgrading means also opening the systems to external software being then downloaded. Right. And if you want to do it frequently, then of course that many number of threats increase. So the threat, shall we say, threat surface increases if you want to upgrade your systems continuously. The safety is that they're supposed to be robust, they're supposed to be working, don't touch it. That seems to be the common understanding. And that's what we used to do, that there was reliability, the fact that they performed well, they did not go down, the systems were hardened, they didn't fail very often, is what we are looking for. Now we are looking is how can the systems be broken. Now that's an altogether different case. So therefore, changing the software frequently is not a solution. What would really now be needed would be to re-engineer the systems from bottom up again, taking into consideration security of this kind, which we did not do earlier. And now we have added another thing, what is called the IoT. This is devices which can be any place, and we are connecting them freely to control system. The IoT devices are much more insecure than even the control systems for which we are seeing problems. So I think we are, in terms of this era, I think what we need to do is a completely different approach, which is nation states should have an agreement that they should not hack each other. Now that's something the Russians and the Chinese have been saying in the United Nations for quite some time, that let's have the agreement among ourselves that we will not do this. But unfortunately, it's the United States who believed that they had an edge over others. And we know from NSA's leaks that Snowden had, how much of a lead they had, that they refused to agree with this. Now, the offensive capabilities of the United States is still more than others. That's what the assessment is. But others have caught up to them partially, if not will catch up with them in the near future. And offense is much easier than defense. And I think that is where the nation states getting into attacking others, I think this is the biggest danger which we have. And unfortunately, the solution is not going to be our engineering our systems better. It is to make it impossible, meaning the big players agreeing that as nation states they will not hack each other or hack anybody for that matters, and their focus should be defense and not offense. And I think that if that is not done, we are in for very dark times, particularly as you know, the world is becoming more and more intelligent, therefore more and more prone to hacking.
All right, Prabir, thank you for sharing those worrying thoughts, and hopefully what you say will happen one day. Thanks.
Hopefully.
Thanks. The world number one Novak Djokovic remains without an ATP Tour title this season after losing against Russia's Andrei Rublev in the Serbia Open final last night. It was Rublev's first win against a world number one, so clearly he is on top of his game. However, as we now know, he will not be allowed the privilege of competing at the Wimbledon, amongst the most important and richest events on the ATP Tour. Leslie Xavier from the NewsClick Sports Desk joins us now. Leslie, it seems not everybody agrees with the position that Russian players should be banned.
Yeah, so the classic case is Rublevs and the Russian and Belarusian players who have been stopped from taking part in the Wimbledon. Wimbledon has banned these players. So, but the ATP, the governing body of tennis, professional tennis, they have brought out a statement condemning the move, and they are very clear in their idea that there shall be no discrimination on any players based on their country. The only criteria that would be taken into account while giving entry to players is the official ranking of the players. So Wimbledon has a cutoff of rankings. So players who come under those and are clearly eligible to take part in the tournament. And by the deal between ATP and the Wimbledon, they are not supposed to ban these players. So ATP, their board will convene and they will decide on this matter what action to take against the Wimbledon, or maybe to take the discussion forward to find an amicable solution to this. So the tennis establishment has always been very clear in this regard. They were outrightly against banning the players because they believe that players themselves are individual representatives, though they represent their countries. They are there by their own merit and hard work, and there should not be any move that would take away that from them. The irony is that there have been other instances where players have been stopped from taking part and ATP was powerful. The most famous one being Djokovic's incident in Australia.
What is the politics behind these kind of bans, Leslie?
It is this sporting bans have been the biggest soft power tool that has been implemented over the years. It has been there during Cold War bans and boycotts of events, and how that played out and how it was used to push forward certain ideas, certain ideology, certain political stance, certain ways to protest. All these factors have been, throughout history, we have seen that. The current idea of ban, it stems from the basic premise that athletes are used by regimes or governments to push forth their propaganda, put out the superiority of their regime or rule or their country and things like that. But what we miss out on this is that when we ban an athlete, firstly, it is again the other party using these athletes as for their own good, for whatever goals that they want to achieve. It is wielding of soft power. It is also partly propaganda also, because there is a for and against side in this, right? So if the ban is implemented by the against side, then that is also propaganda in its own right. So we miss that point to start with. And secondly, when we target these athletes, we also fail to take into account the human element in it, the individual athletes and how they are, why they are, where they are placed, and why they are silent or why they choose to speak. Because most of the athletes you are talking about in Russian system or in any system for that matter, the Olympic athletes or the athletes who are not professional and even professional athletes in non-team sport, they are usually dependent on the state and the state infrastructure and the system that is provided for their uh, athletic uh, competitions to prepare themselves for competitions for their career at large. And also at the same time, there are repercussions that they face, real repercussions, where whether they speak out or not speak out. I mean, it could be punishments, it could be bans, it could be things like that. So when the world expects these athletes to speak out, they fail to realize where they come from and what are the constraints that they have to deal with on being in Russia or being in any country for that matter. And the other, which we have discussed in debrief earlier as well, earlier episodes, when the original ban came, when the war started and the original ban came, is that the whole process is I mean selective. So there are conflicts happening across the world. So by that measure, the number of conflicts that US has created across the world, then no US athlete should be allowed to participate anywhere in any competition for that matter. So why this selective outrage? Why this selective ban? That's also part of the larger politics at play. So these are questions that arise from this, and these are questions that are conveniently ignored because the larger narrative that's been pushed forth is that these athletes are silent. Why are they silent? Don't they have social responsibility? Of course, they have social responsibility, but first and foremost, the responsibility stems from within, from them, the individual and their immediate circle, and then it grows out into the country and into the larger world. And so, their silence or their outspoken, like for instance, Rublev, the tennis player who has been banned from Wimbledon, he was outspoken. He wrote on camera saying that. Calling out for peace. So there are athletes who speak out, there are athletes who don't speak out. It's a personal choice, and it's a personal choice governed by a lot of factors, which should be taken into account when critiques come out, baying for their blood, baying for ban.
Leslie, thanks a lot for joining us. And that is all we have today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow, and please follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And for more stories and updates from around the world, read www.peoplesdispatch.org.